So there was a point, I think I had the second property where I have a contractor that I work with now on every property, and my cleaner turned project manager because she's like amazing at it. So we were sitting in the courtyard and she turned to me and she said, "Hey," insert Southern accent here. I can't do it. "Don't having all these houses feel amazing?" And she's like, when you go to these, like, I'm trying. But she said, when you go to these houses, aren't you like, wow, I have all these houses? And I said really quickly, well, these aren't my houses. Each one is a business that's decorated like a house. And then I had to stop and think about, why did I even say that? And I think why I said that and why that's important is because you have to look at each one as a business. So not only does each one operate its own P&L, but you're removing the emotional attachment of having a house, like a domicile, so that you can make data-driven decisions. And it allows you to test, pivot, optimize without getting attached to how it's always been in your houses, so you have to think of it as a business, but a business that is guest-centric, focused on the guest experience. You are not the house. You have the house or the business. And when you think of it that way, you can think, very business-minded. How can you make these decisions without emotional paralysis? How can you, even down to decorating, I probably would never decorate my own house the way I do for these STRs. So, what does that look like? And, basically, you can receive criticism on, the way that a particular house is set up or, anything like that without it being criticism of your worth. So you're separating yourself, identifying this as a business, and it's not your identity, basically. So once I realized that I had separated myself emotionally, because when I'm looking for primary residence, I've got kids and I'm like, oh, I want this and this. This is totally different. Yeah. So, when deciding on what property, and again, the first one was more like, I told you, I had been looking, and then my husband's like, how about Augusta? And I'm like, how about this exact house? So that one kind of worked out like that. But, one lesson I learned from corporate America, and this answers your decision-making process question, you have to think about who are you and what do you stand for? So same in any corporate job. I learned this from leadership training. It's, what are your values and commitments as a person and an operator, and just knowing that, you are the leader of this organization, and how you think about things and what you stand for and who you represent really affects the entire morale of the organization beneath you. So your team and your guests. And so I had to think about, okay, who am I in this situation? And I came up with some personal motto, like I'm an intentional entrepreneur who communicates consistently, committed to providing amazing experiences, finding and supporting the right team of people. And I was thinking, okay, who am I? I'm a communicator. I am, committed to providing detailed and eclectic experiences, not generic properties. And I'm committed to finding people who see the vision with me and who have ideas as well. So I came up with who am I? And then when I saw the houses, I could rule them in or out, because did they represent what I stood for and what I was looking for? And so for me, I feel like stance really shapes those decisions. So I was intentionally looking for something that had, or could, with the right paint, have a good curb appeal. I studied competitors, like I said, relentlessly. So I wanted it to be very different. So I was looking at, obviously bedroom count, and actually I was looking for one level, mainly because of the way it's so hot in Georgia that the air conditioning, I started pivoting on I was looking for in terms of plumbing and electrical and roofs and all of that. But, curb appeal, what does it offer? Where is it? Then of course the numbers, and is there an ADU? Is there opportunity for multiple income streams? There's one property that I have that recently I decided could also be marketed for events when it's not being rented. So it just has two houses, main house and an ADU, and very, very private courtyard where we put a bunch of games and a pergola. So that's just, for events. So I was looking at it from the guest experience standpoint, but also the numbers had to really make sense.
Yeah, that is awesome. And I love how you described each one as a business, which kind of takes that emotion out of it. And I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, well, on my first one, I'm okay if it just breaks even because I just want to get experience, or, like they justify a bad deal, and you would never justify, like, I'm going to go and start a business that I know is not going to make any money, but it's okay because, I'm going to put all these hours into it, do all this work. But it'll just be for experience, while I starve to death, it's like,
Yeah.
it needs to be profitable at the same time. And all those components that you thought through in terms of functionality, guest experience, and the numbers, they all play into the numbers, and making sure that the numbers make sense. But I think that's such a good framework of like, each one has to, you can't like have a bunch of like a lot of people are like, well, once I get to scale, then I'll make money, once I have a whole bunch of them. And it's like, if each one loses money or just breaks even, you're going to have a crappy portfolio once you get to scale. It's not like all of a sudden, well, now I have 10 of them, so now they make a lot more money. It's each one individually has to do really well. And then eventually you have a portfolio that does really well.
Right.
So that's,
That's very true. And you have to also take into consideration something could go very wrong,
yes.
which I had plumbing, with a property. And so if you're just sort of like adding mediocre properties to your portfolio per your point, and then something goes wrong with one of them, it could be a disaster. So each one has to be very intentionally decided upon, and removing the emotional attachment. Like, I feel it is so different from your primary residence, because you can be like, oh, okay, well, I guess the kids could share a room in this case. You can't make concessions like that. It has to really be, you know, right on almost every level before you purchase an actual house for your portfolio. I definitely agree with that. It can't just be like, oh, well, I hope enough of these will work out, each
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. And not to open up an old wound, but I'd love to hear more about the issue that you had so that people can learn from that. And, again, to your point, like, this is why you want to make sure that there's a lot of cash flow every month worked in, because you will have issues that come up.
Yeah. So the property that actually generates the most amount of cash flow had uh, kind of a significant problem. It was 100-year-old house, and I didn't really. Yeah, I mean, you don't anticipate kind of everything going wrong, but we had a plumbing issue that caused literally water to fall down from the ceiling, and I was running around like, oh my god.
Oh,
So it was really crazy and destroyed a lot of the house. And so yeah, then it was sort of just a cascade of things as a result of that. And so, we had to factor in the repairs. And it was quite a big setback, because again, you don't anticipate something this large happening. But luckily, because it does generate a lot of cash flow, we were able to eventually recoup our our losses, and make sure the plumbing is like rock solid moving forward. But we had to redo all of it, like the
oh
entire house. Yeah.
gosh.
And down to the sewer. I learned a lot about plumbing, and the various things that can go wrong in a house. So I would just say for your listeners to just, don't be negative or something, but just, make sure you're keeping that in mind, that you either have an extremely good inspection, or a secondary. You can actually get a secondary inspection on a property if it's an older house, and you just factor in that there's going to be potentially a few things that you have to repair, fix, modify, build, from HVAC if it's in a really hot area, to the roof if it's a rainy area. So, I mean, just think about these things going in, and make sure you're, dissecting everything you can when you're looking at a property.
Yeah. Yeah. 100-year-old houses, or 100-plus-year-old house. We own, most of ours are that old. But it's always like, I either plan to gut the whole thing, or we are doing a super thorough inspection, because, all that original stuff that was installed, if it's still remaining there, it's going to be a major nightmare. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah. And then water, to your point, like, I think water is the most costly thing for any um, property owner. You know, it's like
Yeah.
supply lines, drain lines, water in basements, water, you know, leaking through roof, like just water. It's so damaging. And it
Water.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, it can just
Yeah.
happen. Like, I mean, if you own a property, there's so many different ways water can cause problems. So it's like
Yeah.
thinking about water and how, you know, all the different ways that it can cause damage and just making sure that you try to mitigate it as much as possible is a great lesson, I think.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
um, so one of the hardest parts, I think, for most business owners, and especially for short-term rentals, is, you know, just managing people. And you've done such a good job with building your boots on the ground team, despite being remote, you know, across the country. I love listening when we had dinner together about how you manage this and some of the interesting experiences and stories that you have, just working with people, because everyone's got different personalities and different backgrounds. And so, what was your approach to creating a team from scratch in a new market? And I assume your recruiting background probably helped with this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns out it did, because, well, recruiting is constantly, identifying people's skill sets and where they are happiest being, what they're happiest doing. And what a person's doing may not be what they could be doing. So, for instance, my cleaner is the most detail oriented person ever, and she's amazing at response times and project management. So, I identified that, hopefully, a little bit from my recruitment background, and said, hey, what if we pivoted to this role? And so, my approach to building a team, I didn't even know I was going to build a team, to be honest. It was done, and I don't know, I think part of it is I got lucky, but I also failed a lot in the beginning. I tried to find, good contractor. I tried to find a good interior decorator, and I met some, interesting slash questionable individuals. But once I met like the right person, and for me, it was about identifying, well, what motivates this individual? Like, why are they doing what they're doing? What kind of person are they, and how can they benefit your endeavor while are mutually, giving them the business, and how can you make them part of it? So I think I mentioned in the beginning, the way I do one thing is the way I do everything, or that goes for anyone. And so I always try to include people on the vision of the project, but get their input also, because there's ideas everywhere. So
Mm.
when you're including people, in the North Star or in the vision, and asking them their opinions, and ask them, what do they see? Then they become more typically involved and passionate about it. And so for me, after I met a few interior decorators, I finally landed on one. Her name's Lauren. And I noticed her gift is taking 100 random ideas, and whether it's inspiration from Airbnb or feedback from the guests or conceptual direction from me, and she can make it really cohesive.
Mm.
She doesn't really execute, she elevates. And so I might bring her very disconnected ideas, and somehow she finds the thread that ties it all together, and she gives structure to inspiration, and she's just really, really good at it. But I went through a few people, and the design part is very important to me, and providing experiences. And so I needed someone who could get that and take my crazy ideas, because I feel like sometimes I really have them, and she needs to like translate that into something that communicates that vision or those ideas. And then I met Billy, who is brilliant, high IQ, high EQ. He is a contractor. He thinks about design, also flow, guest experience, and the why behind decisions. He asks great questions. He's someone that I brainstorm with all the time. And he's also very funny. And that matters, because you're constantly, I mean, the amount I'm scaling, I'm working with these people all the time, like just going from one to the other to the other. So Billy is genuinely interested in creating something excellent and not just getting paid and moving to the next job. Like he has amazing ideas. And I listen to like 80% of them because they're really amazing. And then Erin, I mentioned, she was great at project management. So she's inherently motivated due to life circumstances, and she's laser focused on achieving success for herself and her two kids. And Billy and Erin work really well together. So I have all these text strings with everybody. And then there's an individual named Ryan. So he works in cybersecurity. He loves to install Ring cameras and lights of all kinds and TVs, door locks. And he's inherently motivated by verbal appreciation. So he'll send me pictures. Look, I just installed the camera, at this angle. I'm like, that's fantastic. You can really see everybody coming to the door and, all the TVs. And he has great ideas about all the IT things. So, and he works well with everyone. And then there's Lawson, the handyman. He kind of reminds me of a character on a sitcom. Hard to explain. Really hard to explain. If you met him, you would think that is very accurate. He loves getting into the weeds of whatever needs to be fixed. And so plumbing is in that, category. And he just goes in and shows up like a character on a sitcom. And then there's Donnie, the painter. I don't think he's ever said a word. I've never actually spoken. We kind of communicate telepathically. No, he just loves painting interiors and exteriors. He paints. I mean, loves painting. So
don't mess with me. Just let me paint.
Yeah. I'd just point and he'll paint. And so I realized that I had this team and, we would all kind of have team meetings and, how does what one person's doing affect the other. So Billy will finish building out a bar area and, have ideas on the floors. They should be acid stained, whatever that, and then Lauren, who's the interior decorator, will collaborate with him and say, no, I think it needs to be, whatever that is. And so how can everyone work together? But I do feel for me that I need all these people because, that's kind of the foundation for how this all works. So we just go from one to the other, to the other, to the other, which is why I've had all these houses in one market, although I am considering moving to another market at some point, but I don't know because I have such a great team. So I'm I don't know how that would work, but I'd have to rethink about that. But I think identifying people's strengths and how do they collaborate with each other, creating a North Star and seeing what their visions are as well. And then just frequent communication and again, capitalizing on what they do best. So that's how I eventually formed a team. And again, there were a lot of people in and out throughout the process, but these are the people that I landed on.
That's amazing.